Oh, Joe, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I've got no sound my end. I can see everything, but no sound coming through.
Roger, the meeting's just about to start, so I'll try and deal with you offline. There's no noise. There's no noise at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Licensing Committee. Before I open the meeting, I'd like to ask any members who have got a device to make sure they're muted. People who are coming in by remote, please make sure their cameras and microphones are switched off unless they wish to speak. And ideally not to use the camera facilities as this can cause an effect on the quality of the meeting. Advise members that the meeting may be recorded and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy. The recording of the meeting may be added to the Council website. Members accessing the meeting remotely should use their Swellborough Council or Kent County Council laptops to participate virtually. If you join using a link on the website or on a mobile or tablet device, it may not always be possible to identify you, and you may not be recorded as attending remotely. I would like to welcome everyone to the hybrid General Licensing Committee meeting, including any visiting members attending remotely and members of the public. In the chamber, we have the Reliance manager, Della Frankwell, attending remotely, licensing officer Chris Hills and Joe Thompson attending remotely, contentious team leader, Mid-Kent Legal, Robin Harris, present in the chamber, environmental protection team leader, Mid-Kent Environment, Julie Oates attending remotely, Democratic Service, Billy Alloway and Joe Millard present in the chamber. Are there any other members, officers attending remotely? Oh, Charlotte, sorry, Charlotte. And Charlotte, you are real. Thank you, Charlotte. Right, I've got to do the emergency procedure. Do you want me to go through this, or are you all happy? You all are happy that I don't go through this long sheet? Right. Sorry. Oh. Thank you, at least you saw someone. Right, have we got any apologies for tonight?
Thank you, Chair. I have no apologies for this evening.
Thank you. I would like to ask members to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of July 2021, minutes numbers 127 to 132, and the extraordinary meeting held on the 9th of September 2021, minutes 255 to 259 as correct record, and to accept the minutes of the licensing subcommittee held on the 15th of September at 10 AM, minutes numbers 276 to 280, and held on also minutes numbers 281, 285, that was held on the 15th of the 9th at 11:30. Then on the 12th of October at 10 AM, minutes numbers 361, 364. And at 2 PM on the 12th of the 10th, 21, minutes numbers 365, 369. Are members happy with the minutes? Thank you very much. Have we got any declarations of interest? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. It's on item 7. I'm a DVSA approved driving instructor. I'll leave the room during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Item agenda is a Part B report for decision by the committee. We have got no one registered to speak from the public, so I would ask item 6, taxi tariff, lead officer Christine Hills to introduce the item. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Chairman. This report asks whether members wish to agree to a change to the taxi tariff and permit officers to carry out a consultation with the taxi trade before returning to a further meeting of this committee with our findings. The tariff was last increased in August 2018. At that time, members recommended that in future the tariff would be reviewed in regular intervals of every 2 years, as before the tariff had not been considered for 6 years. We therefore consulted with the taxi trade in late 2020 and reported to a meeting of this committee in January of last year. Because of the pandemic and the effect it had had on the taxi trade, the consultation we did at that time consisted of merely asking the trade whether they wanted a fare increase or not. Of the 350 people consulted, we only received 33 replies, and of these, 22 replies thought that no increase to fares should be made. Members therefore decided that no increase in the tariff should be made at that time, but with the caveat that the tariff be reviewed again in 2022. Taking into account the rise in the cost of fuel and the cost of living generally, members will have to consider balancing the needs of the trade to make a living against the fact that rising costs could also affect the public, and this would be one more increase for them. You can see from Appendix 2 that in Kent we have the 8th highest tariff out of the 13 local authorities and are in overall 54th place in the country. This is down from the position in January 2021 when we were 6th in the county and 46th in the country. If members do agree to us going out to consultation, we imagine that there may be more of an appetite within the trade to having a fare increase this year, and we have already received a couple of requests in this regard. We consult through SurveyMonkey as the most efficient reporting tool for us, although we still give the trade the option to come back to us by post or email if they wish. We normally work up 3 options for the trade, taking into account CPI, fuel prices, train and bus fare increases, and the fares of the other Kent authorities. The current tariff that Swell uses means that fares increase in 10p units after a set yardage has been travelled, whereas most other local authorities increase in 20p units. Also, we have no Sunday rate, whereby most other local authorities have 50% extra. So these factors could also be taken into account in our calculations and would help the trade. Any proposed increase to the tariff does by law have to be advertised for a minimum period of 14 days, and any objection would then have to be considered before an increased tariff was implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Any members got any questions? Councillor Winkler.
Thank you. It's not actually a question, but I do have some concerns, as the officers just said, about putting an increase with inflation, probably about 6 or 7%. But in saying that, I do think a consultation would be a good idea, because obviously, as the officer has said, the fuel prices are going up. So I will be going along with that for a consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Winkler. Any other members? Councillor Burt.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think it's right that at this time we do go out to a consultation, and I'm happy to formally propose the two recommendations. I think the concern here is a fine knife edge, and Chris has hit it on the nail with the cost of living increases. Obviously, at the moment we have a severe shortage of drivers, and a lot of drivers have actually given up the trade during the pandemic. Certainly a lot of older drivers have given up the trade and decided to take retirement. you try and get a taxi on the island evenings and weekends, it's practically impossible at the moment. And each of the companies are ringing around each other, trying to sub work to each other, which is not good for the trade overall. But any cost obviously has to be passed on to the consumer. So the cost of living there as well, people are going to be expected to pay more. So I do think it is the right time to go out to consultation and kind of test the waters. But I think we might find a split camp come back, and I think what we get back might be very informative, but we might end up with a 50-50.
Thanks to the councillors, but any other members? Councillor MacDonald.
Yeah, I think having been an operator, not of taxis, but other vehicles, if the costs increase too much and you find extreme difficulty in getting drivers, it's inevitable. Otherwise, you'll end up with no service, and all the Tom, Dicks and Harrys that seem to appear, who seem to claim to be taxi drivers. I don't know what, I can't remember the firm now. I think it came from America, I think, but completely unregulated, really. So I think we've got to look after people who are running an honest and proper business.
Councillor Dindal.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor MacDonald and Councillor Beard has said most of what I was going to say, but I would add in the probable reduction in bus services. So there's going to be a problem of people getting around if they can't get a taxi, or indeed if the taxi is too expensive. But the prices of fuel is going up so high that you risk knocking out half the taxi trade anyway, because they can't just afford to do it at all. So you're between the devil and the deep blue sea, really. You know, you have no taxis because they can't afford to do it, and you have no buses because they can't afford to do it. So it really is, as Cameron Beard said, a knife edge. But I'm also concerned, as Councillor Beard says, about the consultation, because the consultation from most people will come back, we don't want to put it up. But what they risk, obviously, is if they don't want to put it on, taxi drivers can't cater for the extra fuel costs, then there won't be a taxi.
Thank you. Any other?
I'd just like to echo what Councillor Beard said, and I'm happy to second the proposal that he's recommended.
Thank you. Anyone else? I mean, I quite agree. It's delicate, because the other day I came out the station expecting taxi people to be there, and there wasn't one at all. And I waited there and waited, and it was raining, and they turned up 15 minutes, and unfortunately someone stepped in front of me and took the taxi. I wasn't strong enough. The old lady got it instead of me. But that's how bad it's become. And I've even seen people who have a taxi to take the children to school. They're not turning up because they haven't got the drivers. So appreciate everything. Oh, Councillor Tim Gibson.
Yeah, just to speak to the proposer and seconder here, I would wholeheartedly agree with everything that's been said so far. And one of the key things for us is we expect these taxi owners now to jump through so many hoops, and there's so many costs and hidden costs out there that certainly before coming onto this committee, I hadn't even realised. As local councillor, it's been a real eye-opener. So I would really urge members to go out for the consultation, and let's see where that takes us.
Thank you very much. Does Chris want to come back in on what she's heard?
Well, the consultation will be with the taxi trade, and whatever is then decided by committee, it's at that stage that it goes out to public consultation and for them to comment on the proposed tariff. So just to emphasise that point to you, what we found in the past is that the taxi trade are pretty realistic. So whilst they will, I think, want some sort of increase, they won't be too greedy. And of course, we will, when we're working up our proposals, make sure that we're not going to go beyond what is charged elsewhere in Kent. So, you know, it will be a slight increase, obviously. Possibly the biggest change might be the Sunday price. But also remember that a tariff is the maximum that a Hackney carriage driver can charge. But if they decide to charge less, they can even take somebody for a pint of milk and a loaf of bread if they want to. So, you know, they've still got the leeway that if they want to, you know, on some journeys, charge less than the metered fare, they are allowed to do that. That might help you, I don't know.
Right. Oh, sorry. Pressed the wrong button again. Yeah, got a proposer and a seconder. Shall we have a vote on that? On the two recommendations? Those in favour? Hey, is it me? Yeah, I know, sorry. I was waiting for something to happen. Thank you, that was unanimous. Thank you very much. Item 7, taxing driver remedial course. Lead officer Joe Thompson. Joe, could you introduce the item, please?
Thank you, Chairman. This report provides members with information on third-party taxi driver assessment courses and asks them to consider their use as an enforcement option for licensing subcommittee. This information has previously been requested by members for the licensing subcommittee to give an intermediary between revocation and issuing a warning to taxi drivers. It would give the opportunity for suspension of the licence to be reinstated on completion of the training. This information is in the licensing policy that for the committee to suspend a licence until the driver has successfully completed a driving standards test. This can be found in Appendix J of the proposed policy on page 23 of the agenda. This approach is also in line with the Department of Transport statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards, July 2020, on section 9 on page 28 of the agenda. Information is available on the courses and the options available on Appendix 3, which is in page 29 to 31 of the agenda, which details the names of the providers and an overview of what those courses provide. Members are requested to approve the use of third-party driver assessments as an enforcement option for the licensing subcommittee and choose which training provider or providers they would like us to use. That's all, Chair.
Is that all?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for members? Councillor Whiting.
Thank you, Chairman. Unless I've missed something, I don't know what information I'm going to use to take a decision about which providers we go for and whether it's a limit that needs to go to proper tender.
The information is in Appendix 3, so the names of the providers are there, and there's a table with information on which each provider, what a breakdown of the courses. There's two main providers, Green Penny and Blue Lamp, and there's information on which other councils use those providers. And then there are some other providers, but they don't offer some of the options that those two providers, Green Penny and Blue Lamp, offer.
I'm obliged. Thanks, Chris. Thanks through you, Chair. But it doesn't actually tell me what the level of service and other things are, and whether we need to know that at all, or whether it's just something that we accept that the other authorities use these guys. And maybe that, or we use both the Blue Lamp and the Green Penny.
That would be an option as well. We could use both providers so that there is availability for drivers to get booked onto a course quickly, because obviously if their license has been suspended and they need to pass the course before they can get their license back, then we want them to be able to get booked up quickly. So that would be an option if they could use both.
But just looking, Blue Lamp only there's 3 that it doesn't offer. So would they have to go to one that offers all of them?
Not necessarily. The ones that they don't offer are evenings and weekend courses. So the Green Penny one, that they do weekdays and evenings and weekends, whereas Blue Lamp would only offer weekday appointments. The remedial course was one that we particularly looked at, because that offers us, with the Green Penny, to tailor the course a little bit to our needs. So we could suggest things that we want them to put into the course, but Blue Lamp doesn't have that option, and at the moment their remedial course is only available via Zoom, so it doesn't have the driven element that you have with the Green Penny course.
Thank you, Joe, for that information. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you. I note in recommendation 2 it says preferred training providers, so that leaves it open whether it should say approved training providers, because it might be a preferred option, but is that limiting them to that option? So if someone said, well, actually it suits me, I've done a course with TG Training, would that be, it's a course, would it meet the requirements, and would the council have a leg to stand on if they said, well, actually I've done a course, it might not be the preferred one, but you didn't approve any particular type?
The suggestion is that we're using them with the licensing subcommittee, so it's when a driver is taken to a hearing. So it would be down to the members of the licensing subcommittee to say where, if they wanted to specify a particular provider. So it wouldn't be at the stage of a driver applying to become a licensed driver when the courses would be used. So the control would be with the members of the committee.
Mr. Robin Harris, please.
Oh, no, literally just going to say what the officer said is that this is a sanction imposed by the committee, so there wouldn't be an alternative provider that would be acceptable.
Councillor Winklis.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, over the years I've sat on quite a few subcommittees where taxi drivers have come up in front of us, and I don't think they necessarily always understand. They should do, but what they should be adhering to. So my personal view is I think we should go along with one of these, either Green Penny, Blue Lamp, or both, to help make these drivers possibly more aware. Thank you.
Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My question's been covered already. Thank you. Councillor Palmer. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I have a? Oh, sorry, Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, it's all right. I came in late, actually, as usual. No, I'd like to propose that we use both of them, because then it doesn't make somebody a monopoly. So I think, options, I don't know how you choose the option for a particular thing, but I think they should have the option, or the council committee should have the option to decide which one they want to take. So if you have both of them, you're not reliant on one provider.
I'm prepared to second that, Councillor Winklis.
Councillor Dendall.
Thank you, Chair. From what Councillor McDonald just said, just a very simple question. The driver picks up the cost of the courses, yes?
That is correct, yes.
Course is equal between the two organisations, because obviously they'll try and pick the cheapest one, I would guess.
Yeah.
Again, it will be imposed by the subcommittee. So the driver themselves won't have a choice. The subcommittee can make the decision. It might be in the circumstances that they look at one and say this is effectively the same thing and will offer the driver the cheaper course. But it might be the one whereby the remedial course has the driven aspect and they feel that that would be more appropriate and therefore they would impose that one even though it's more expensive.
Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, sorry, just quickly. And another issue there is one provides weekends, which might be more suitable for the driver, and the others providing doesn't provide weekend training. So that's another consideration for us. Bearing in mind what we've been told by our legal officer. Thank you.
So, Mr. MacDonald, you proposed having the two options, and you seconded.
I seconded, Councillor.
Oh, you sorry, you said. So, do we have a vote on that now?
I wonder if, Mr. Chairman, it would be appropriate because obviously the first recommendation is the principle of the thing, and if you're going to the second recommendation before the first one, you've rather undermined your vote on the first one, haven't you? So perhaps you'd like to take a vote first on the first recommendation, and then follow that with a vote on a slightly amended second recommendation. Has been.
Could I have a proposer for the first recommendation? Councillor Whiting, and the seconder, Councillor McCall. Those in favour of the first? Those against? Right, could I have a proposer for the second recommendation? Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah. So can we have...
If I suggest that the vote now is on the basis that the second recommendation is as per amended by Councillor MacDonald's proposal and seconded, so you're voting on going ahead with both of the possible options.
Yes. Next vote. Those in favour? Thank you very much. Right, item 8, taxi policy revision. I'll ask Chris Hill to introduce the item. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. This report is seeking approval for a revised draft taxi policy to be put out to consultation for a period of 12 weeks and then to return to committee with the outcome. Swell have had a taxi policy in place since 2014, although until 2018 it was limited to about 6 pages, so wasn't really fit for purpose. In 2018, the policy received a comprehensive overhaul and became a working document that both licensing and members of the licensing subcommittee have been able to use when advising the taxi trade and enforcing against them when necessary. This policy is now due for renewal and has been reviewed, taking into account the requirements of the DFT statutory standards that were published in July 2020. Appendix 2 details the main changes to the policy. As you can see, we've tried to simplify this version by removing appendices that we felt were unnecessary or which have been superseded by the statutory standards. And we've moved quite a few paragraphs from the main body of the policy into the relevant appendix to make it easier to understand and to have all the information in one place rather than scattered throughout the policy. The majority of the changes have been to provide additional information or for greater clarity, and I would hope are self-explanatory. There are 2 major changes which will affect the trade. The first is the requirement to provide a tax check code to prove that a driver is registered with HMRC. This is a requirement that has been introduced by legislation. From the 4th of April this year, all new applicants will have to sign a statement to confirm that they understand their obligations towards registering for tax, and all renewal applications for either driver's licences or private hire operator licences will need to provide us with the tax check code, which we then need to confirm. No application can be processed without this information. I think it will remain to be seen as to what impact this may have on the trade. The second issue is about what stance the council want to take regarding climate emergency and the taxi fleet. The licensing team have been very fortunate to have had a great deal of advice from our colleagues in environmental health, who are specialists in this field, and especially from Julie Oates, who is kindly attending this meeting and will be able to answer any technical queries that you may have. As you can see, we have suggested that we lower the age requirement for vehicles of 6 seats or below from the current maximum age of 8 years on first plating to a maximum age of 6 years, so that Euro 6 emission standards will apply. More importantly, there are 3 proposals that will affect the future taxi fleet, which are shown at paragraph 3.6 of the report, and which are: from the 1st of April 2023, all applications to licence a new vehicle that is not a renewal of an existing licence plate must be for low emission vehicles, which means they would have to be either all electric, electric fuel hybrid, or Euro 6 compliant for either petrol or diesel vehicles. From the 1st of April 2023, all newly licensed petrol or diesel vehicles will only be licensed until the 1st of April 2030. And also, an existing petrol or diesel vehicles licensed before the 1st of April 2023 would also cease to be licensed from the 1st of April 2030. And thirdly, from the 1st of April 2025, all new licence applications must be for vehicles that are ultra low emission, that is less than 75 grams of CO2. Ultra low emission vehicles include battery electric vehicles, extended range electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, or fuel cell electric vehicles. The reasoning behind these suggested requirements is to give the taxi trade fair warning of future vehicle specifications so that financial planning can be made. Members will note that we are also asking whether you feel that a reduced licence fee could be offered for cleaner vehicles through a variable licence fee table as an incentive to the trade. The current cost to licence a vehicle is £290 plus a first plating fee of £50, and a renewal of a vehicle licence costs £290. For the draft policy, there will be a full 12-week consultation period to run between the 28th of February and the 20th of May, with consultees being those detailed in the report. We will enter all incoming responses onto a grid, together with our comments regarding them, and present our findings to a future meeting of this committee. Members will note that paragraph 5.7 states that the following consideration by this committee and an amended policy based on your recommendations being drafted, the final policy is proposed to be signed off by the Chair of Policy Development and Review Committee in liaison with the Chair of General Licensing Committee. However, following advice from David Clifford, as the Council will then be using the committee system for decision making, it is likely that the final policy will instead go to the relevant service committee for formal adoption. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Members, any questions? Councillor MacDonald.
Yeah, I think we've got to be very, very careful because with the cost of electric vehicles and things like that, we could end up with no taxes, quite frankly. I quite agree with the Euro low emission, and I think that's the way we ought to go forward. But I'd like to actually study the recommendations and actually look at the costing, because if you end up, I mean, none of us want to see vehicles going along with throwing out lots and lots of, it's not just the CO2. The CO2 is not too bad because the trees absorb that, but it's some of the nitrogen pollutants that come out of vehicles that we've got to be very careful of. They're the nasties. So, you know, I used to operate an awful lot of vehicles, and I think we ought to be very careful. Otherwise, if you impose some conditions in, I know elderly people, and I'm elderly, but you know, would fight shy themselves. I mean, I know they're not going to be operators, but of buying some of these very expensive electric vehicles. Quite frankly, they're too expensive, and it puts, well, I think it puts funds into foreign manufacturers. Doesn't really help our economy. So you've got to find a very careful, be very careful with imposing too many conditions. I certainly agree with cutting down the emissions. So I mean, the old days of taxis, you used to see them sending out a cloud of black smoke behind them, you know, but I think we've got to avoid that. Thank you.
Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. No, I also echo Councillor McDonald's concerns about outpricing taxi drivers. However, I do think we need to have these standards in the draft for the consultation, because as the years progress, we need to be looking at the cost of taxis. And I agree, currently at the moment, the price of electric cars does seem a bit daunting, but I'm hopeful that there will be funding to support the changeover to electrics over the coming years. But I do think that needs to be kept an eye on. My particular question relates to page 52 of the overall pack, in Appendix 1, talking about 2.44. On there, there's a line in it that says, it is proposed that this aspect be tackled through education and promotion. And we're talking about the anti-idling. My question really is, or my comment is, I'd really like to see the details of how and when this education and promotion would take place for taxi drivers. It's not commented on in a lot of detail. I'm a strong supporter of the anti-idling legislation, although I do accept in some circumstances taxis may need to have power if it's a freezing cold day to ensure that they don't freeze in their cabs. But I would like to understand better about the education and promotion of the anti-idling legislation, because anti-idling legislation can actually keep cash in taxi drivers' pockets because they're not burning it all up in fuel while they're stationary. Thank you, Chair.
No other questions. Oh, Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I've got about 4 that I just want to raise briefly. So if anybody else wants to speak in the meantime, I'll do 2, and then they're only quite small issues anyway. The first one on page 36, item 5.2, and it's the proposed list of consultees. And I just wondered whether it'd be a good idea to include parish councils, because they're going to be impacted even greater as we get less and less taxis. So I'm just wondering whether that'd be something that we should be considering. And the second one for now is on page 45, and it's under item 112, and it's subscript E for Echo, which is the Disability Discrimination Act, which is now, of course, only applicable to Northern Ireland, and it's equalities legislation. Do we really need that line in there?
Did you have 2 more?
I did, but I think I'm conscious other people might want to speak.
Councillor Dindal.
Sorry, Councillor B want to speak, but it was just to point out that item K on that list has parish councils.
Ah, thank you very much. I missed that totally. Thank you.
Councillor Burt was, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I do think this is the right time to go out to consultation on this. I recall not that long ago that we were quite uneasy about electric vehicles as certainly as hackney carriages due to the reliability concerns. I think that still does slightly bear, and it does mention it in here about making sure that the charging infrastructure is in place. And I think that's going to be partly on us and the county council to ensure that that is in place to support the trade. On 3.4, it mentions about it's page 34, it mentions the Euro 6 standards, and to ensure it, we're cutting the maximum to 6 years old instead of 8 years old. My understanding is Euro 6 coming in 2014, so why can't we keep it as 8 years? Because they would then pretty much, and if we're that worried about it, we could put a caveat in there that vehicles that aren't Euro 6 won't be accepted. I'm just thinking in the short term, the long-term ambitions of this policy are there. I just think in the short term, if someone comes forward with a vehicle that complies with Euro 6 and it's 7 years old, which it could be if I'm reading it right, that Euro 6 coming in 2014, then actually we'll be telling them that they can't have it when under the current policy they could. So I think we should certainly make it clear that we're looking for Euro 6, but I think 8 years is still acceptable. I know we're going to have certainly one taxi firm's going to come back and ask if they can have green cars with white stripes instead of white cars with green stripes. I can see that coming from a mile off already. I do think we talked earlier about the cost of fuel going up. There will be taxi companies out there who are already considering this, of upgrading their fleets, because in the long term they're going to have to anyway. So although there will have to be an outlay to begin with, if we're working with them, we're actually going to bring their costs down. Which brings me back to the third recommendation about the lower license fees. Again, in the short term, I think that's a good idea. I think because the cost for running the vehicle will be cheaper for them. But it's a bit like the fact of the road tax. Once we move to a situation where we're not selling petrol and diesel vehicles anymore, that revenue is going to have to come from somewhere. So it's, at the moment, while electric vehicles are largely let off the hook, there's going to be a hole in the budget to fill. So I don't think that should be looked at as a long-term ambition. I think short-term, yes, but long-term, that's going to need a bit more work.
Thank you, Councillor Burt. Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just come back to page 45 there, Chair, just for a comment on the Disability Discrimination Act, just removing that. We've got the Equalities Act further down at line K, so it's just whether that was still applicable, as it only applies to Northern Ireland, the EFREC or the Disability Discrimination Act. And then page 57, item 3.44, similarly, the council would encourage drivers to undergo practical passenger assistance training with particular regard to those with special needs. When we say we're going to encourage them, how are we going to do that? How are we going to manage that? Because special needs, whether it be children being taken off to school, whether it's people with unseen disabilities, or whether it's with people with physical disabilities, I would sincerely hope that those that are charged with looking after them as the taxi drivers would have that in mind. So I just perhaps like a bit of a comment on that one. And finally, on page 59, 392, council officers will send a reminder letter to the current taxi driver 3 months before. And again, we're kicking and screaming into the 20s now. I wonder whether that could be email or perhaps even text message as well, just for expediency. Thank you.
Councillor Valentine, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I couldn't find a facility to raise my hand on my connection. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. Firstly, that I would just remind members that by 2030 you'll no longer be able to buy a petrol or diesel car. So the suggestion that Euro 6 vehicles shouldn't be licensed beyond 2030 is not really that radical. We are going to be seeing a lot of change between now and 2030. And the other point with electric vehicles, of course, is that although they are more expensive to buy at the moment, and hopefully that differential will be reducing, well, it already is reducing, they are very much cheaper to run. And given that taxis presumably do a lot of hours and a relatively high mileage, those running costs will make a big difference. And I would also point out in these proposals for the consultation, nobody is being forced to even buy an electric vehicle by 2030. It permits hybrids and plug-in hybrids. The Toyota Prius has been a popular taxi car for many years. You don't even plug them in. All the energy comes from the petrol, but they're very good on their fuel efficiency, so therefore they're cheaper to run. So I think members may be sort of over concerned about the practicality and the costs of the change here. I would suggest they're quite modest given the changing picture that we're going to be seeing with vehicles. One question I would like to have is, how does this compare to what other councils are doing? Are other councils going further or not so far in the policies that we're seeing? And I have in mind sort of what the state of the art the leading councils are doing on taxi licensing.
Thank you, Councillor Valentine. Hello, Chris. Could you answer some of those points that have been put forward, please?
Of course I can, Chair. Firstly, the education and promotion query. In actual fact, of course, Julie will lead on this because it's her specialism. But before the pandemic, we had already planned doing newsletters to drivers, going out and physically visiting them in their offices and on the ranks. So I imagine that very shortly we will go back to doing that and to get the message out to people, about idling and what have you. So that will be tackled going forward. For Councillor Gibson with the Disability Discrimination Act, I will take that out of the draft before it goes out to consultation. The comment about the reminder letter being sent 3 months in advance, it is a letter, but it's sent by email and it goes via our database. So, that's how we've done it for many years. It's only those that don't have an email, and there are not that many drivers these days that have that. With the Euro 6 standards and when we license the vehicles, should it be 7 years, 8 years or what have you, I need to leave that down to you, good members, to decide what you think is appropriate. What I would say to you, and what's been very interesting, is that an awful lot of the operators have been licensing a whole new raft of vehicles, and one in particular who basically had a fleet that was, just about okay, have licensed a whole new load of vehicles because they've got a huge amount of government grants. So at this moment in time, it would appear to me that operators aren't that poor. I don't know what it'll be going forward, but at this moment in time, they seem to be doing okay. In terms of the best practice, I would say I've only actually investigated within Kent, and as far as that's concerned, there are 3 councils that I'm aware of that have sort of introduced any sort of requirement at all. Dover, which I can't recall, but it's less than what we are proposing, and Canterbury and Gravesham and Medway are imposing or out to consultation on requirements that are extremely similar to ours. So there isn't anybody that I would say in Kent that is ahead of us in the game, and I think that we're keeping up quite nicely, and the other 9 authorities in Kent aren't doing anything at all. So we are, doing our bit, I would say. And I think that's probably about it, unless a member has got something else they need to ask me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Any members? Councillor Gibson.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, just a comment on page 57, Chris, if you could, with item 344. where we're saying we'll encourage drivers to undergo practical passenger assistance, what that might look like.
Well, I think at some stage we may want to introduce what a lot of the other authorities in Kent have done, which is to have some mandatory training, and one of those would be around disability awareness. We've not done that so far, but I can assure you that quite a few councils in Kent do that, and I think that personally it would be a good idea. I think it protects drivers and assists them in how they load vehicles, wheelchairs, for example, onto their vehicle, and it protects the travelling public. The drivers know what they're doing, so that is something that we can certainly look at as bringing in as another condition of licensing or some training. We could perhaps provide it for free for our existing drivers, but I do think that we need to actually look at that in the future. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Chair.
Councillor Dendell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's talking to the same item actually as Councillor Gibson brought up. From a KCC perspective, Councillor Gibson referred to children and being taken to school and so on. Of course, KCC awards contracts for taxis and minibuses to take SEND children to school. And as I understand, and Councillor Whiting may know more on this than me, but there is training for passenger assistance for those specialised services. But I would agree it's something that should be done. The only snag has been, I've heard of several cases where the drivers who have been trained are not the drivers who actually end up taking the children to school. They switch the drivers. So that's something to keep an eye on, and that's for enforcement, of course. But as I understand, KCC do that training, yes.
Any more questions? Could I have a proposal for recommendation 1? Seconder, thank you, Councillor Thompson. Seconder, Councillor Whiting. Those in favour of the recommendation? Those against? Thank you. That was carried. Recommendation 2, can I have a proposer?
I'll propose. Councillor Winkless.
Thank you. Seconder. Councillor Gibson. Those in favour? Sorry.
I still think that we should stick with the 8 years. As has been pointed out in the report, it says that they will cease to be taxis in 2030 anyway.
Yes.
But I just think that gives us a bit more wiggle room than making it 6 years, and you have someone turn up with a Euro 6 and we're saying no, you can't have it because it's 6 months older than it should be. And I think I just double checked, September 2014 is when Euro 6 came in. So then it's not a huge difference. But they cease to be a taxi in 2030 anyway, which meets our standards.
So you're proposing it. Could I have a seconder, please?
Second.
Councillor McCall. Those in favour of the proposal? Those against?
Can I just change the wording slightly there, if Councillor Beard agrees? When it says through a variable licence fee table, can I put in the word temporary variable licence fee table in the spirit of what Councillor Beard said, that you shouldn't make it a permanent? You've somehow got to get the fees back in at some stage.
Councillor Burt.
I'm going to disagree, because it's our right to review the policy when we feel anyway, and this policy goes under regular review. So I think we will come to that bridge when we cross it. I don't think at this juncture we need to set out that it's temporary, but
what it's worth. I think the point, it's an academic point. So.
Councillor Dendor, do you want to? Oh, could I have a proposal? Councillor Dendor, seconder. Councillor Beer. Right,